Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are in the world today. We have a great, exciting presentation. We're honored to have our guest join us, Dr. Eric Jackson, on how data collection and use of crash data in Connecticut is sparking a revolution down there. So for a quick overview of the agenda, we're currently in the arrivals and intros section. After which we'll be moving swiftly to the presentation with Dr. Jackson. Followed by that, we're going to be doing some Q&A and discussion, and then I'll be closing you out and introducing you to the next event that we're happening in June 16th. So I don't like to spend a lot of time on introductions. I actually like to get straight into the presentation, but I want to introduce you to your speaker today, Dr. Jackson. Eric Jackson, based in Connecticut. Completed his Bachelor of Science in the University of Kentucky and his Master's in the University of Connecticut. He's the Executive Director of the Connecticut Institute and the Director of the Connecticut Transportation Research Center. His current research is focused on improving crash data collection processes in Connecticut, as well as providing public access to crash data to transportation safety analysis tools. He's currently leading the Connecticut Transportation Safety Research Center's safety analysis team in the development of new software and methods to allow Connecticut to fully implement the highway safety manual methods with the Connecticut Roadway Safety Management System. So with that, over to you, Dr. Jackson.
Great, thank you for having me today. So let me see, I'll see if I can get my screen to share. All right, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. So today what I'm going to talk with you guys about is give you an overview of what we did in Connecticut and the changes that it's kind of rippled down throughout the Connecticut Department of Transportation. So what we were working on in Connecticut was looking at the crash data. When I say crash data, I mean motor vehicle crashes. And we work very closely with police departments to collect that data. Up until we started our project, the Connecticut DOT was the primary collector of data, and a lot of that was done via paper. And what you'll see throughout the presentations is all the steps and hurdles we had to take to get through to a point where we're actually starting to collect that data digitally, and then kind of the impacts that it had as we started looking at other systems within the DOT, all the potential for the digital data that we were collecting and how it could actually improve their systems. So just to start off with a few terms to know, because I use these in everyday life and I realize that most people don't know them or have any idea what they are. When we talk about MUC is called the Model Minimum Uniform Crash Criteria. This is a national guideline that's set out by NHTSA and the Governor's Highway Safety Administration on what should be collected at the scene of a crash to allow them to look at crash specifics and information and how to improve safety. PR1 stands Police Report Form 1. That's basically our form that we use to collect crash data. There's a PR2, which is the fatal form. So if somebody's fatally injured, they have to fill out the PR2 as well. TRCC is the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee. It's essentially a committee in the state comprised of all different stakeholders that meet bi-monthly to go over traffic records issues, data issues, and how to improve coordination across the different state agencies. Safety Research Center is a center I'm a director of. CDIP, it stands for the Crash Data Improvement Plan, and that Connecticut pulled in the feds into. They basically did a full review of the entire crash system and then provided feedback on how Connecticut should alter their system to make the most out of the data they were collecting. And then hopefully everybody knows who NHTSA is. NHTSA kind of controls the regulation and safety of motor vehicles. So if you ever had a vehicle that's been recalled, NHTSA does those recalls. So NHTSA is a big data user and big stakeholder in the crash data that we do collect. So in terms of safety data, kind of where this all started, NHTSA has their 6 core data systems: crash, driver, vehicle, roadway, citation and adjudication, and then injury surveillance. These are the 6 data systems that each state should be collecting. A lot of our asset data is in the roadway system, things like where traffic signals are, where crosswalks are, where curbs are. All of that asset information most of the time is collected in the roadway system. I would almost argue that crash itself is an asset, and that collecting that data digitally really makes everybody's life easier as they're moving forward. We also have, NHTSA also has what they're calling their performance measure 6-pack, and these are different performance measures that NHTSA tracks, and they look and see how states are performing in each one of these. So timeliness, accuracy, completeness, uniformity, integration, and accessibility. So each state goes through a traffic records assessment, and they assess the state on how well, say, they are integrating across the 6 data systems that are up above. And they score them, and there's a series of questions that they're asked, and they bring in national experts to basically review what that state is doing and if they're meeting the goals and if they're making strides towards each one of these performance measures. Just a little bit of background. Up until 2015, the crash form in Connecticut was almost solely paper-based. You see a picture of the form there on the right. It was actually a series of overlays, which you dropped the sheet of paper down over, and the boxes on the side where you'd write in a number. If you did not have that overlay, it was next to impossible to decode what was actually on the form. So this was also the form that if you were involved in a crash, you would get this form, the police would give you your report, and it would have all these numbers on the side, and the people that received that report had absolutely no clue what the numbers on the side were, and those were critical information for the crash, such as weather condition, what was the light condition, all kinds of different vehicle information, traffic conditions, all that type of stuff. We had very few electronic submittals, so state police was submitting a little bit electronically, but they hadn't really established a full electronic program. The other caveat was only about a third of the information that was handwritten on the report was actually entered into a database. So there was significant information that was basically not entered in because the DOT collected essentially the pieces of the form that they thought were critical for them and then didn't collect anything else. So things even like body type, make and model of the car, VIN number, that was not entered into the DOT database. So they had no way of understanding if there were make and models of cars that were more prevalent to be involved in crashes than others or more prevalent in terms of injuries that were taking place. And the largest issue they faced is all of this paper came in, and then they had to have a team of 12 people manually type that third of the form into a database. That process resulted in a 16-month backlog. So a crash report would come in, it would sit on a shelf for 16 months before it was actually typed in. And then the data wasn't released until the entire year was typed in. So we were looking at around 2 years of a backlog before that crash data was actually able to be analyzed. So major inefficiencies built into the system and major lags in being able to understand what's going on with vehicles that are out on the roadway and the transportation system in the state. This was all governed by state statute. So Connecticut State Statute 14108A basically says the entire state has to use a uniform crash report, and the commissioner of the DOT will prescribe the content of the form. But the DOT did not have any authority to mandate electronic crash reporting because this form and the statute were written back in the 1970s, before anything electronic was actually there and taking place. The paper form that they were using up until 2015 was last revised in 1995, really before the internet even started to take off. So it was 20 years worth of crash data essentially sitting there, all on paper with very little use or utility. If you wanted crash data from the state, you had to write a letter. You wrote a letter over. This was still even in 2014. You wrote a letter. They would burn a CD and then mail you the CD, and then you had to parse out that data yourself. Extremely inefficient. So what we did in Connecticut, we looked at being able to digitize that form and app. We started essentially in 2011. We had the CDIP assessment. We worked on getting the DOT off the mainframe. We realized they were coding to an old PR1 form and we needed to update the PR1 form. We established the crash data repository, which I'll cover shortly. And then we had the TRCC set up a PR1 working group. And that working group helped to revise the form and update it to national standards and guidelines. And then we started off with the local eCrash pilot out of the Capital Region Council of Governments. You'll see as we move along how that kind of fell apart. So the DOT committed to a traffic records assessment. They developed a CDIP plan. They recruited a crash data champion. That this was their sole job, was to make sure this form is updated and digitized. They had no other responsibilities other than this project itself. And the DOT hired a consultant software developer in 2012. After that, there were several iterations of the business plan. So we made a business plan. Then we started looking at how compliant is this new form with the MUC national guidelines. We looked at a single state solution, kind of looking back at that eCrash pilot. And then the crash data repository needed to be updated to the new the new form that was being collected out in the field. And then we started making more adjustments to the business plan. We changed around 2013, 2014, we realized that this local eCrash pilot, kind of one vendor for the entire state, was not going to work. That vendor was using what they called a TurboTax approach to collecting crash data. TurboTax is great if you're doing taxes once a year. It steps you through every single question of the form. If you're a police officer that understands the form and wants to enter in data quickly, asking basically next after every single question you enter in was not efficient in being able to collect data out in the field or back in the department once they're back to enter in some data into their system. And then we were looking at January 15. So early on, back in 2012, we realized this was going to be a multi-year project to get to the point where we needed. So we said January 1st, 2015 was going to be the go live date. We are going to set up a test system so people before 2015 could actually start using a test. And then we'll move all the test data over into a production database, and everything goes live January 1st. And then after first, you'll notice we needed to assist some late adopters that were a little bit late in coming to the table and getting things updated on their end. So just kind of the roadmap of where we went. So we had a firm date commitment. We started doing a technology capability surveys, looking at police departments and vendors and what they had. And we essentially decided we're not going to even change anything in the MUC data set. We're just going to fully adopt the national guidelines so that we're essentially 100% MUC compliant. There were only two fields that we decided that we could not do: counties, which Connecticut does not use counties. We have a county system, but they're pretty much lines on a map. There's no basis for the counties. And then police departments did not want to put the BAC or the blood alcohol level test results on the crash report form. So those are the only two data elements that we do not collect that are required as part of MUC. We do the data linkage piece to get county, but then the BAC stuff, we'll just see as we move forward, we have some ways that we're going to hopefully be able to start merging that in. So some of the goals was activate a new system by January 1st, 2015, and at the same time move to 100% electronic reporting. Essentially, no more paper. It was a lofty goal. Many states told us we were not going to be able to do it, and many states many police departments said that there's no way they're going to be able to make that happen. So we realized we needed to change the relationship with law enforcement. So we started having workshops with law enforcement. We started to engage them, and we adopted this no agency left behind philosophy that we were going to bring and we were going to drag every police department forward if they wanted to or not. As you can imagine, that pretty much kind of stopped us in our tracks for a little while. And what we had to do is actually start engaging software vendors and engage the vendor community for the first time. What we did, so the Connecticut DOT could not engage directly with vendors, so they reached out to UConn. We were apart from the beginning, but they basically came out and said, we need UConn to set up contracts with vendors, and we need UConn to pay vendors to upgrade their software. And that's what we ended up doing. We hosted a series of mini grants for software vendors to actually upgrade their software and get to electronic reporting. And we were able to make our January 1st, 2015 electronic reporting deadline. Along the way, we had to develop several different tools just to get to the point where we could collect data electronically. Some police departments basically did not have, their software vendor basically told them they were not going to update their software and they were on their own. So we had to create a fillable PDF, and that fillable PDF runs on an XML format. And we had to develop a very, very efficient tool that lets police departments essentially with one or two clicks upload all of their PDFs to the state. Then once they were uploaded to the state, what we created was a crash report reader tool that basically validated the data coming in to test the vendor software just to make sure the data was formatted correctly. We developed a series of edit rules. I think at this point, we're up to 157 different edit and warning rules that if our system imports the data in and it doesn't match, they actually get an email saying that their file is rejected and they have to redo or edit their crash report so that it'll pass the files. We also had to develop an XML schema. So this was to ensure that we had a standard that all software vendors knew how to export their data out from. We weren't telling them how to collect their data. All we were telling them was, this is how you need to transmit your data over to the DOT. And then lastly, we have DOT specifications and testing and certification protocols. So we require that each vendor in the state be certified to submit their data over to the Connecticut DOT. And they had 13 different crash scenarios they had to complete within the software, send it over, that all the edits and validations passed, and that the file came over clean and matched exactly the XML schema and data that they were required to input into their software. So in Connecticut, we had 17 different software vendors in the state. That's one of the reasons we went the XML route. 9 were funded to upgrade their system. The other 8 decided they were not going to upgrade their system and that the police departments were on their own. That's where the crash report reader, weekly meetings, we developed test scenarios, we had validation test scenarios, and then we went through the crash certification or software certification process. A lot of effort went into making sure that the vendor software was able to submit clean over to the DOT before the go live date of January 1st. So this is how crash data flows in, just so you have an idea of the electronic data flow. So we have a DOT crash database sitting over at the Connecticut DOT. Law enforcement agency either uses our fillable PDF or their CAD RMS system. And then they collect that data and they submit it up to an SFTP site. So there's a secure site that XML file goes up to. And then every hour, the Connecticut DOT pulls that XML file down into their crash database. They do a validation process. So if it validates, it makes it in. If it doesn't, there's an email notification that goes back to the software vendor and an email that goes back to the law enforcement agency and know that the crash they just submitted did not pass edits and validations, and they need to resubmit that report. As you can imagine, most police officers or most agencies did not like to be told that their crash report was not accepted and they have to go back and edit and make changes. It's one of the keys that it's integral that the software vendor understand the edit validation rules, and as the officers are entering in their data, they're made aware that the data they're entering in has an error or a warning associated with it, and they can correct it before they even submit it to the DOT. So after the data is at the Connecticut DOT, we have a series of data quality analysts that go through every single report, and they update the reports and they add a little bit more information, such as the route and milepost of the crash. And what we do that to try and get standardized road names and standardized locations for these crashes as they move forward. We also have a series of internal reports, and I'll show you a couple of those in a second. Every night at 3 a.m., every crash that's gone through the data quality process is then exported out. It goes over to the Connecticut Crash Data Repository, which I'll show you. And then we also send data over to the Department of Motor Vehicles Commercial Vehicles Unit, and they submit that data to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. And what that's used for is it tracks vendors or companies that are involved in crashes, and they will actually pull or remove their ability to do business in the country or in the state if that vendor reaches a point where they have too many crashes or too many violations. So this was incredibly timely data for them. In the past, DMV also had to wait 24 months to get those reports back. So for us to be able to basically send a report over to them as soon as it's touched by the DOT dramatically improved their ability to target bad vendors or bad carriers. And then lastly, the crash data repository allows the users, allows engineers, general public, allows law enforcement to actually come in and view their crash reports, plot their crashes on a map, and do analytics on their crash data, all of which could not have been done in real time or web-based while we were still using a paper form. So this is what Crash Editor looks like. So this is what the new crash form in Connecticut looks like. That was designed. As you can see, now if you're a citizen that gets your report, you know exactly what that 0-1 in location of first harmful event means. That definition for that data element is right there in the box. So now everybody that's getting their report has the ability to understand what every single data element on the report is. What that did was it made essentially their old form was just a front and back. We now crash is around 6 pages. Police departments were not happy that now we took their 2-page report, or technically 1-page front and back, and made it a 6-page report, because now they would have to print out all that paper and mail it in, or they would have to fax it over, and it just wasn't it wasn't useful or wasn't timely to be able to do paper submission. So we essentially forced the entire state to shift electronic because they didn't want to have to print out so much paper and spend so much time driving or mailing large packages back and forth to the Connecticut DOT. You can also see there's the narrative. So as a coder sitting down to add the route and milepost, they can read what happened in the crash, and then we have a crash diagram of where the place. And this diagram is drawn by the officer at the scene of the crash. We also added in a system that would let the coders map the crash and make sure that the location is correct. So if you click the map button up at the top, it'll plot that on a map, and you can see if the latitude, longitude are correct. This one's supposed to be 500 feet south of Myrtle Ave on Albert Ave. So that's roughly close. If you look down at the scale bar, it's maybe a little bit closer to the intersection than it should be, but we try not to move the police officer's push pin unless they're dramatically off or dramatically different. And then we have a series of data quality reports. And what these data quality reports let us do is they let us track several different things. The first one here is an agency status. So we can look at each individual police department. When's the last time they submitted cases? How many cases did they submit in 2013 versus so far in 2015? Basically looking to try and understand, are they underreporting? Have they not submitted a crash in several weeks? Is there something wrong with their update system? And we find this quite frequently, that a server will stall or a server will go down, and we'll have to call the police department to restart their server or look at their software, and then we get 2 weeks worth of crashes uploaded in an hour's time period. So we check this once a week just to try and make sure that everything that's being submitted is done accurately and timely as possible. We also look at the numbers of errors and warnings that are coming in. So you'll see here, each one of these rows is a different edit rule or warning rule. And then the first column tells you the number of crashes that came in where that warning or error was spotted. When we first started, around 10% of our crashes were rejected. The vendors learned very quickly which edit and warning rules that they were not implementing properly. And after about 2 months, we were down to less than 1% of crashes were being rejected. And we still hover right around 1% of crashes being rejected. We have a couple vendors in the state that just don't, they refuse to update their edit rules. And we still have several crashes that, even though they're rejected, the police department never resubmits them. And we have staff that basically goes in and opens up each one of those and determines if it's a crash that we needed to delete, or if they can read the narrative and basically fix the report to get it past the edit and warning rules. And then lastly, one of the reports that we use a lot is our backlog report. So our backlog report tells us how many crashes are sitting there in the queue waiting for our data quality people to start analyzing those. And it basically tells you the output every single day, the input coming in of reports, and then the output that the staff are doing for data quality. When we started, as I mentioned, we had around a 16-month backlog. Right now, we're less than 1 month. And actually, if a commercial vehicle crash occurs, commercial vehicle crashes jump to the front of the queue to try and meet our timeliness needs and goals with FMCSA. We could have a commercial vehicle crash that occurs today, and by tomorrow, it's live up on our website for people to analyze the data coming out of that crash. So we essentially removed a 24-month process into just a couple of days. We've had the backlog down to around 8 days before. But that makes everybody at the DOT stressed out that they're going to run out of work, and they're going to get to a point where people are sitting around with nothing to do. So we try and keep the backlog around a 30-day or around 8,000 crashes sitting in the queue to be coded. And we monitor this every week just to see where the backlog currently sets. And then we went live. So on January 1st, 2015, we went live with the Muck 4th edition. As you may understand or know, the police departments, some of them were ecstatic. Some of the older officers were not happy that they had to learn a new system. The new recruits and younger officers took this up very, very quickly, and were very happy to not have to handwrite reports anymore. But every year we still deal with a police department or two that puts legislation forth This year we came the closest to having the crash report reform repealed in terms of I think the bill stated that the report form had to be no more than 4 pages, and we had 2 months to revise the form. If you remember earlier, it took us 2 years to get to electronic reporting. There was no way we were going to be able to revise the form down to 2 pages in just a matter of 2 months, unless we made all the font size 6. So that kind of got us to electronic data collection. And the next few minutes of the presentation, I'm going to go through kind of what that has sparked in the DOT and why we're now looking at kind of a tsunami of digital data being collected moving forward. So our current programs are really on data integration, safety analysis, visualization, and GIS. Some of the growth areas we're moving into rapidly are maintenance management systems and asset management. So in terms of data and integration, we have the CT Crash website. So this is open to the public. So anybody that wants to can go to ctcrash.uconn.edu. You can query crash data. You can pull up reports. You can look at diagrams. There's a lot of different things that you can do there. And you see the diagram on the right. This is essentially our new data flow. The original one that I showed you, stepping you through our crash report, has been expanded quite a bit. We're now submitting data electronically over to NHTSA, so they are notified as soon as possible of a fatal has taken place. We've integrated roadway data into the crash editor tool. We're also sending data out to private parties such as Carfax and Experian. Prior to 2015, if you got a Carfax report for any vehicle in Connecticut, it was absolute garbage. They had 0 data on any crashes that occurred in Connecticut. And the other states are the same way. So now what we essentially do is every night, every crash that we get in, we forward a small subset over to Carfax. So now Carfax has information on every crash that's occurred and vehicles that occurred. So now that when you get your Carfax report, if that car has resided in Connecticut its whole life and been involved in a crash in Connecticut, you'll get that as part of your Carfax report. So the crash data system upgrade was sponsored by the Connecticut DOT. So they paid around $12 million to update and build this system moving forward. We just signed another $10 million 5-year contract with the DOT to continue to support them on crash data and then data entry and then an analysis of their crash data, which you'll see kind of in the next slides. So this is open and free to the public, free for data downloads. A lot of great information that's there, and we have a lot of people from all over the world that are downloading our data and then using it in safety analysis. So the most notable one was school bus crashes. There was groups interested in the number of school bus crashes and the injuries that were occurring. They were able to come in, download every single school bus crash that occurred in the state of Connecticut, and then merge it with some other states or other countries' data to start looking at trends within school bus crashes. So this is what the Connecticut Crash Data Repository looks like, just a high-level overview. The repository here, up at the top, we have what we call our fatal ticker. This is essentially as real-time as we can get of the number of fatalities that have occurred on Connecticut's roadways year to date. So you'll see, I think this says April 7th, 2021, there's 55 fatalities in 2022. We had 72 in 2019. We had 47. So it's just a way to track to see, are we moving forward with a lot more fatalities than we have in the past. Once you submit a query, you basically have ad hoc query capabilities of every single field that's on the crash report. You can hit view summary or view results. You can see this is for crashes for the town of Tolland. There's been 1,600 crashes since January 1st, 2015, involving 2,700 vehicles and 3,500 people and 304 tractor trailers. And then each one of these tabs gives you information on each of the person's vehicles, crashes, or trailers involved in the crash. And then one of the most beneficial parts of the new crash report form is we were collecting GPS latitude and longitude. So now we have the ability to create maps of where these crashes are occurring within the transportation system. Previously, there were no GPS coordinates collected. It was just a route and milepost, and it was very difficult to plot those on a map. With these, then we can create heat maps, and now you can see where your crash hotspots are. And then if you zoom into an intersection, you can look at all the crashes that occur at that intersection. You can view the diagram as completed by the officer at the scene of the crash. And then we have some street view images We integrated this with Google Street View, and you can see the push pins on the roadway of where those crashes actually took place. And this is 360 degrees, so you can spin around and see where those crashes are. So this has been extremely popular for a lot of people looking at crash issues that are taking place. What we're working on now is linking a lot of these different databases together. So if you remember the NHTSA 6-pack that we had for different data elements, driver history and judicial data is before crash. The roadway and crash data is during the crash, and then everything else is stuff that occurs after the crash. Things like emergency room, trauma data, toxicology data, did that person die? And what we're trying to be able to do is build a data system where we can look at what was their driver history before they became involved in the crash, what were the assets or what was the geometry situations that led up to a person being involved in that crash, and then looking at their post-crash treatment. The next tool we've developed is our safety analysis tool. The safety analysis tool is much more geared towards the engineer, where the crash data repository is much more geared towards the general public. But the way the safety analysis tool works, this was an additional $7 million in funding that we received from the DOT and Federal Highway. And the agency, the DOT, started using this since 2019, and it's also a web-based application. But it basically implements the Highway Safety Manual. You'll see there's 6 steps over on the right, from network screening all the way to safety effectiveness evaluation. These are the ideal steps that each state should be doing to analyze transportation safety within their town or within their state. And this is what this tool looks like. So we have a similar type of roadway viewer with roadway data elements here. Once you zoom in on a certain area, you can get some diagnosis statistics, looking at what types of crashes are there. You can create intersection diagrams that let you know the most common types of crashes or collisions that are taking place at that intersection. And then you can zoom in on individual roadways. The network screening tool actually allows you to screen the entire transportation network and find areas where there's a lot of crashes are occurring, or there's more crashes than there should be occurring at those intersections or those roadways, and then let DOT target those for slides. Data visualization. So we're in the process now of building out some Esri dashboards using Dash Up. And that, one thing I do want to mention, as part of the CRSMS tool, we had to collect a significant amount of asset data to make this tool actually work. So we had to digitize every single intersection in the state, at the location, the number of lanes on each approach. Did it have a turning lane? Was there a crosswalk there? Was it a traffic signal or a stop sign? Did it have a pedestrian push button? So we had a group of undergraduate students basically go to every single intersection, both on the state system and the local system, and document all of this information to really be able to run this software and do the full analytics that are needed. Luckily, Connecticut is a fairly small state, but it still took several years of data collection just to get to the point of being able to do the state and then the state intersections with locals. We're still finishing up the local intersections, which is around 42,000 intersections throughout the state that need to be digitized and data collected on. So our dashboards and then emphasis areas along the top, you can see we're looking at different targeted emphasis areas, whether it's motorcycle crashes or teen crashes or young crashes or fatalities or bicyclists or pedestrians. Each one of these tabs, as you click it, updates to a new dashboard and gives you information. This is all interactive, so if you're only interested, say, in local roads, you can click on the local roads, no apparent entry, and it'll filter the entire table just based on that one kind of filter that you've then applied. There is a filter here to the left that you can also pull out that will let you filter down to state roads or different intersections or a whole host of filters that you can filter this data down even further by. The last 2 slides, the things that we're currently looking at and working on. So the Connecticut DOT was looking for a maintenance management system to help with some data and productivity. We got really close to being able to purchase a maintenance management system. And then essentially we had the maintenance department stand up and say, we don't want a maintenance management system. We like the paper that we have. We like being able to write the paper, give it back to the person sitting at the desk and have them type that into a system. So we were right at the point of being able to receive $1.5 million to purchase a maintenance management system. And at the last minute, maintenance pulled the plug and said they would not support that effort moving forward. So in the meantime, other things that we've been working on is some tools to be able to start digitizing some assets. So this is the ADA ramp compliance app that we created in Survey 123 that basically lets a maintenance person go out with a phone or a tablet, pull up different parts of the curb ramp, and then inspect it and see if it meets ADA compliance. And that's also part of the maintenance management system or the asset management system that we were working on. So we were working on being able to digitize every single traffic signal head, every single pole, every single traffic box, intersection location, and kind of how all those are connected together. And Justin Manville helped us out tremendously, being able to design the system and architecture to be able to do kind of the parent-child relationships in terms of how the data should be structured and move forward. I think we've completed all signalized intersections in the state, and we know at least the ones where the DOT has this data on intersections that are there. There's still some that are not controlled by the Connecticut DOT that we haven't really digitized yet. And then lastly, so there's been several national awards in recognition for stuff that we've worked on. Recently featured back in 2018 in Public Roads Magazine, essentially for better information for better roadway safety. And it set Connecticut up as one of the national leaders for crash data and then really merging into safety analysis and safety analytics moving forward. And with that, I'll be happy to try and take any questions that people have.
Okay, so this is Justin Manville, and I'll facilitate some questions. So just if you want to type them in the chat box, I can ask them. So annoying that people prefer paper over software. Yeah, I agree. I do have some questions. Eric, do you want to take a second maybe to describe what CTI looks like in terms of who's on staff, maybe some backgrounds? I think it's super interesting that you have a very diverse group of folks working at CTI. Do you want to go over that quickly?
Sure, I can give you a very high-level overview. We realized very quickly that police departments do not like talking to civilians, and police officers learn from police officers. So one of the first things that we did is we hired 2 retired law enforcement officers to go out and do training for us and basically be our liaison with police departments. We also realized that a lot of the crashes that are occurring are human factors or human behavior related. So we have 2 members of our staff that have backgrounds in psychology and social engineering, if you want to call it that. So their focus is on human behavior and what human factors lead up to people being involved in crashes. We also have several database developers that are kind of over on the software side. Whether it's Java, C++, C#. But we also have a group of GIS database admins and GIS developers as well. On top of the engineers that we have that are safety engineers that know how to do the statistical modeling for all of the safety analytics. So we really tried to set a broad set of skills for the group that we have. And we've all learned from each other kind of moving forward. And I think we're kind of all understanding the roles that each one of our people on our team play, and kind of through osmosis in the office, we're all learning some of the skill sets that other people have, and kind of consuming those through a time.
Yeah, I think that's super cool. The people part is a big deal. And then another question that I have is, one, I agree that crash data is an asset, and how have you leveraged that data to kind of make decisions? And by the way, I love the dashboard. That's the first time I'd seen that. Looks good. So how have you leveraged that data to kind of make decisions around that?
So the DOT is using that data to prioritize their projects. So if they see that there's a lot of crashes in a certain area of a certain type, they'll prioritize that project or prioritize ways to collect the data better or edit the physical infrastructure. One of the ways that it's being used most often is by the media. So the media is actually able to, so a bus crash occurs, I get a phone call almost immediately asking how many bus crashes have occurred in the state, how many bicyclist crashes have occurred, how many DUI crashes have occurred. And basically it's a way that the DOT is now able to get the story out. And that story helps with public education on why it's bad to drive distracted, or why, you know, it's bad to drink when you drive. So there's kind of these secondary effects that have essentially reduced or eliminated the number of phone calls that they get into the DOT looking for data, because it's all right there at your fingertips.
Awesome. Yeah, Mark Knight, who, by the way, is Mark has a psychology background. He's I think so. So there's too many questions to ask. Yeah, this is a great presentation, Eric. I have a bunch more questions as well, but I don't want to monopolize the time here. Anybody else with questions? It's spring break in Connecticut.
Yeah, I'm happy to take.
What's that?
I said I'm happy to take questions via email as well. So if you have follow-up questions, I'm more than happy to answer those.
Yeah, why don't we do that? It's spring break in Connecticut. My son just came home, and Eric, I'm sure you want to get back to your family. So I thought that outstanding presentation, as I expected, and thank you very much.
Can I ask one question?
Awesome, thank you. Sure.
I got so many notes and things that I was thinking about, and the irony is I missed the beginning of this because I was on a call with a client where we've been trying to merge disparate sets of data and had lots of inconsistencies, and are trying to move them into a more automated system. So a lot of this is really topical. And as Justin was saying, yeah, I do have a bit of a background in psychology, and so understand the personal aspects of this. But I mean, so I don't want to make a speech. I do want to ask a question. So one of the things that struck me was, yeah, it's only effective when people actually use systems. And I was wondering how difficult it was to get buy-in. And I think you kind of addressed some of that in your explanation about pushback on the data collection side, getting stopped in your tracks and so on. But I'm curious about what, and maybe I just missed the beginning, but what actually drove the push for this digitization? And yeah, because I mean, getting the buy-in on the data collection and implementing it's one thing, but getting the kind of policy buy-in to say the system is broken, we need to do something about that. I mean, what was it that really triggered that to create that impetus in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you ask. It's one of the slides actually pulled out of the presentation because I was a little tight on time. But as part of the Traffic Records Coordinating Committee, one of the meetings we had two police chiefs in that meeting, and they basically stood up and said, you know, we're collecting all of this data on paper, and what you're giving us back, we can't use. We can't take that data, and we can't, you know, set up areas to do patrols. We can't set up areas where we should target enforcement. And we're basically collecting all of this data, and all of my guys feel like they're just collecting data for the insurance companies, and that's all it is. So what we actually did is when we revised the form, we already had the crash data repository up and going, and as part of our training, we would train them on the form, and then we would spend the last hour actually training them how to use the crash data repository, how they could get their data back, how they could look for trends within their data, and a light bulb went off. And all the officers in the room were like, oh my God, I'm collecting this data to save lives. I'm not collecting this just so somebody can get their car fixed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what led up to everybody kind of saying, all right, this is something that's worthwhile. Like I said, we still have a few dissenters that are trying to fight this legislatively, even 6 years later. So one of the roadblocks we're going to face is we did not update to MUC the 5th edition. MUC 6th edition comes out in 2022. So we're going to have to go through this entire process again and update the form. And I can guarantee we're going to have some pushback that we didn't have before, simply because people are now see this as a way to shorten the crash form. But we have advocates on both sides basically saying it's 100% necessary. And then you got the guys on the other side that says this takes up way too much of my time. I shouldn't do this for a crash.
I think it's incredible. You went from basically a 2-year turnaround from the analysis to overnight.
Yeah.
It's like you said, when you actually take the time to examine what it is you're doing. As you know, the collecting data to save lives. I think people change their perception, and it's also, I mean, I've seen that in other situations where people push back on data collection, but then they hear stories about some of their colleagues that have actually got something of value out of it, and then they start to use it, and then all of a sudden they realize, you know, what they can actually do with you know, having that kind of digitization behind it, rather than having 20 years of paper, stacks of paper.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I loved your presentation. I found it fascinating.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Jackson, this is Sadi Patel again. I actually have a question, a little bit more
Sure.
of a future sort of stance on this. And again, I really enjoyed your presentation. It got me thinking, and the gray matter was firing. Regards to automated vehicles and possibly existing vehicles, can you see if there is an ability or a link to link driver behavior, in other words, and the systems on board a vehicle, perhaps contribute to, you know, creating almost like a probability of occurrence matrix out of this, to sort of see if someone's car is constantly activating the ABS system, obviously leading to a little bit, you know, someone's driving too close to each other, a little bit erratic behavior, as well as traction control. So traction control of roadway services, you know, basically saying that the roadway could be too slippery on the vehicle. That's why the traction control kicked in. Do you see any of those current onboard systems also being a useful contributor to the data that you're collecting? And what else would you like to see in like the future's vehicles? Because we're talking automated vehicles. There's a lot of technology. I mean, there's vehicles that are now using LiDAR as well, to sort of look at things that are possibly coming up. I'm just curious to see where you see this industry going.
Yeah, so
and
absolutely.
How the automotive
Yeah, there's several different things that we're actually working on this right now. So connected and automated vehicles is my other area of research that I work on. We're in the process of designing a testing facility out on UConn's Depot campus to start testing connected automated features. But what we're doing right now is we also have a program. If you're not aware, most every car manufactured since 2015 has a black box on board. Some back as early as the 90s have a black box on board. And we're actually, for fatal crashes, we have 2 kits. Each kit allows my law enforcement officers that are hired at the center to go out and download that black box data. And that tells you, 5 seconds before a crash, what was the speed, what was their steering, what was the brake, and it captures all of that data moments before impact. And we're just now starting to use some of that. I think we've downloaded around 50 cars or 50 fatal crashes at this point. The 5th edition of MUC, which we haven't updated to yet, has 2 questions on automated vehicles. So I sat on the National MUC guideline panel. We started out wanting 5 or 6. There was a group that did not want any, so we kind of compromised with 2 automated vehicle questions. I assume that MUC 6, you probably have seen the fatal Tesla crashes that have occurred. I'm assuming that once we start debating on the 6th edition of MUC, there's going to be a lot more fields based on vehicle automation and what is on board of those cars. Because one of the challenges we have is the VIN number of the vehicle does not tell you anything about the technology that's on board. There is no system that links VIN number to, does it have adaptive cruise control, or does it have lane centering, or does it have blind spot monitors? None of that currently exists, and that needs to change for us to be able to fully identify and understand, are these technologies improving safety? Or with our driving simulator, we're starting to look at, do some of the technologies in the vehicle actually cause more problems than they fix? If you've seen Teslas or some of the trends that the cars are moving towards with a large tablet display, there's no longer any tactile feel. So you can't just reach down, find the volume knob, and turn it. You actually have to look down at that tablet, find the spot on the screen where that virtual button is, and push it. That's distracting your eyes away from the roadway. So we're tracking that as well, just to see if that distraction is actually going to cause things to be even more dangerous as we begin to move forward.
Great, thank you. And I'm thinking of a million more follow-up questions, but in the interest of time, I'll reach out to you. Just curiosity.
Awesome. Yep, sounds good.
So, in closeout, ironically, our time is gone. We've only got 7 minutes left for the end of the session, but I wanted to share with you a couple of things about the IAM US chapter, who we are. So we are the Boston branch. So we live in the northeast area of the country. We are the New England branch, I should say, and we've changed our name to cover more of the area now. So we cover all of New England states. We have a 8-member executive committee. We actually are fortunate to have one of those members of the executive committee as part of our team, who's Mark. And we have 13 established branches with another 3 potential branches coming online. We have an active next gen and a women in asset management group. And we have about 500 members in the United States and growing every day. For individuals who are looking to further their experience in asset management, just a brief information for you guys. So we're coming up with a body of knowledge coming up this year. From there, typically a lot of individuals take what's known as an introductory training, which is a typical 1-hour session, which introduces you to the world of asset management at a high level. From there, for people who want to develop a little bit more further skill sets or even looking to do this as part of their regular job, typically go for an IAM certificate qualification. A lot of times people would be networking and working with individuals to understand what that means. The IAM has a structured syllabus in terms of what is actually required of those individuals to learn as a certification. From there, we have a diploma certification, which is a little bit more of a practitioner level. That's where several individuals who have had a little bit more time in the area of asset management will typically learn a few more modules and also have some practical applications and experience of what they've done, and they typically go for a diploma qualification. From there, we have an asset management designation. So typically individuals would register. It's called the Asset Management Professionals Register, where you would essentially earn some three-letter nominals after your name to basically show as recognition of your commitment to the craft, if you like. Just for information for everyone, we actually have a conference that's happening in October of this year. Currently, it's scheduled as an in-person, and we will be recording the event. Obviously, because of COVID right now, we're not too sure if that's going to be moved to a non-in-person, but for now, it's currently in-person. It's happening October 11th to 15th in Denver. The themes will be released fairly soon now, and there are sponsorship availability. We're actually looking for volunteers as well to help support knowledge development and growth in our institute. This is to help develop specific projects in the United States, global projects and asset management body of knowledge updates. We're also looking for people to help with assessing the AMP register, as well as provide mentorship and be branch leads in new branches that could be opening up. For information on that, please email the IAM at usa@theiam.org. So in terms of our local branch, New England, so the remaining of this year, we will be putting on a session in June called Inclusion in Asset Management. I have a quick slide on that. And planning to bring back our popular Resiliency and Asset Management Roundtable, which will be inclusive of utilities, we hope. We'll be debating a couple of things in regards to electrical utility industry and resiliency. We currently have opportunities for individuals to present on the subject of climate change in October, as well as we have an open session on December 15th. So we're looking for good examples to put onto that you feel that may be interest to the greater community in the asset management area. In regards to the next event is Inclusion in Asset Management with the Portland Bureau of Transportation. It's looking at how equity considerations were incorporated into investment planning, and also will outline the steps with equity in regards to leading the investment creating process, and also how they created some dashboards to measure their progress against that. So some final thoughts. If you have any questions or anything else, please email myself at newengland@usa.theiam.org, or my co-chair, which is Scott Morris, who's scott.morris@usa.theiam.org.
Hi, Sachin.
So
I have a question.
Sure.
This is Saidur Rahman from Canada. I'm just listening to the excellent presentation, Digitization on Asset Management Data. Just I have a question that you mentioned that the knowledge development document is developing. So is that the IAM continuously, like we have asset management body of knowledge? So is that the version, or IAM USA is developing a knowledge development some initiative?
No, that's the asset management body of knowledge. The US
Okay.
has not developed its own body of knowledge. No, it's just it'd be otherwise it could end up contradicting one another. So no, it's a single IAM body of knowledge, and what that is pretty much updating,
Yep.
taking best practices to incorporate that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. If there are any other questions, happy to take them. If not, please do feel free to email me them. With that, I wish you a good afternoon, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.